Greetings, it is I, Countess Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today we're continuing my tour of various countries throughout the land of Golarion, the campaign setting for the Pathfinder role-playing game system, the planet that you can play upon. And today we're going to be technically visiting a country which really isn't a country anymore. It's a territory that still... there is some sovereignty there, but it's mostly sovereignty because no one wants to live there. It's a very horrible place. The Sodden Lands is a place racked by an eternal hurricane that is quite literally off of its coast and just tears into it constantly. The nations that were once there, which we will discuss to a degree, fell because of this hurricane, because of the influence of it. The flooding, the waves, the storms, which constantly racked them and destroyed them. Many lives were lost, and there are stories here to tell, history to mention, and a land to discuss, because it is a territory that you can certainly visit, and there's adventures there, old kingdoms, settlements that barely survive, pirates, adventures of all kinds, and certainly old kingdoms and their history still might also be hidden there. Now, as I do with most of these times, I usually start out by discussing a number of books that you can check out for information on this one. And I would start off, of course, with the Inner Sea World Guide. Again, this is a book that provides some basic information on the territory that is the Sodden Lands. Also, the Lost Omens World Guide. I think this picture is a little smaller. That's a little better for this one. This is a second edition one. It talks about the area around the Eye of God, I always butcher this thing's name. The Eye of Abendego. I keep wanting to say call it something like Abendego, but it's Abendego. Which we'll talk a little bit about the Eye as part of this. I think that's where we'll kind of start, as the Eye is an important part of the Sodden Lands. And then finally, the Lost Kingdom books. It's also a book that has some very important information. I would recommend also checking this one out because it has sections on the two lost kingdoms of the Sodden Lands, Lirgeni and Yamasa. We're going to talk about both of them. But these are lands that were destroyed, that were actually destroyed relatively recently and existed to a more recent time period. Pretty much within 200 to 300 years. That's how long ago they were lost. The Eye is not that old. Remember, it's the 48s. It's 4823 in time period for this time here. So think about that. 4823 is the current year. Or sorry, 4723. I'm sorry, 4723 is the current year. And the Eye emerged in 4606. 100 years. 100 years hurricane that's shaped, destroyed two ancient empires, two ancient civilizations, and created the land known as the Sodden Lands. Let's talk about the Sodden Lands. We'll do the larger one here. So the Sodden Lands. It's known because, again, 100 years ago, there were two kingdoms here that were lost, and this land has been shaped, certainly, by the Eye of Abendego. It's battered by storms, flooded. There's very little civilization that's in the area. It's an area, a land that doesn't have a lot of control of any kind. It's just been so battered. So let's talk about the two kingdoms that were here, and then we'll talk about the Eye of Abendego. So before this became storm-lashed swamplands that they are now, because again, they weren't always swamplands either. They flooded because of the Eye. There were two very different civilizations here. Lirgeni and Yamasa. Lirgeni was on the northern side, so the northern side of the Sodden Lands. It was a nation of fortune. Its rulers were the Sawick Brethren, which were astrological philosophers who engaged in auguries before making significant decisions. The thing is, they weren't really good at noticing what was going to happen with the Eye. It was a double blow. The Age of Lost Omens, the death of Eredin, the arrival of the Eye. Their powers of prophecy failed in the New Age, and then the Eye of Abendego, which appeared as Eredin died, right off the coast, destroyed their land and scattered their survivors. What leadership there was committed suicide on 46-15. They just killed themselves. It's said that with their final revelations, whatever they saw and found in the Sodden Lands was too much for them to bear. Now, it doesn't mean the Sawick Brethren and the essence of Lirgeni still survive, because they do. Yes, they may have failed to detect the Eye. The leadership at the time may have been destroyed. But fortunately, under a major influential figure, Mayo Fano, who was a seer of Lingdon, helped lead the people of their country away. They evacuated after the initial hit of the Eye. So, as much as a lot of Lirgeni was lost, there were survivors. So there are some Sawick Brethren that still survive, and they will return to Lirgeni. They want to dissipate the Eye. They want to reclaim their land. There are a number of settlements that are in the Lirgeni territory that still exist within this realm. The capital city of Hiratim on the Frogmarth River. We'll talk about that one. And Ogaton, whether it's not really settled anymore, it's completely covered by water, but it is a location we will talk about when we talk about what's in modern day Sodden Lands. Anyway. Mirapano was a pretty high seer in the Sawick Brethren. Her predictions were kind of looked down upon. She went on the path of lichdom, so she is a lich now. So she still exists. Basically, she also convinced the Brethren, apparently, of the mass, suicide, and used their deaths to fuel her transformation to a lich as part of the entire thing, because she had a bunch of predictions. They ignored it, She gave the information to them, Really, there's a contact with there's also contact with a bone sage from the dead planet of Eox, and also there is Lirgeni's Glory, which is a magical spaceship, which is an actual thing that was launched in Midsummer's Day of 4600 with an elven astronomer, Galvan Zorex, so that's a thing. And actually did crash down 112 years later. It crashed south of the Nesher Mines in Eisger. So that's also a thing that has happened. There's a magical airship that crashed, and that's another thing. That's if you want to know about that, there's the adventure path, or the adventure Doom. Doom comes to Dustspawn. It's all about the crashed ship. That's actually a classic adventure that relates to Lirgen's spaceship. Magical spaceship. So that's Lirgen, though, but that's a little bit more about that. Let's talk about Yamasa, because that is the other of these two nations that were in this area here. Yamasa fared even worse than Lirgen. Lirgen, they ignored the prophecies of one of them. They really didn't have the portents of it. Otherwise, no one else got it. Storm, loss of powers, killed a lot of them. They managed to escape. Yamasa was a lot more, could be considered actually more primitive in comparison to their northern neighbors, and even compared to a lot of other nations in Grundy, especially northern Grundy, like the Assyrians, the Nex, the Geb. A lot of them are much more well developed, and they never had quite the development, the civilized developments that a lot of these other nations in the in northern Grundy had. So once a giant supernatural hurricane, which never goes away, formed next to them, they kind of didn't really have a good way of fighting against it or protecting themselves against it. They refused to evacuate, and that was pretty much it. Their first wave was out without warning, smashed into them, and they just didn't leave then. They were thought to be completely wiped out, but there have been some survivors that have discovered more recently. It's just they're kind of, well, effed, to say the least. Yeah. Those that survived, because they had a kind of caste system, the ruling caste was the Koboto, and those are the people that managed to basically survive. To do that, they broke ancient tribal taboos, and they've engaged in cannibalism and necromancy in order to help keep themselves alive and in power in their small area. So, yeah. They might have been a primitive people, but they were proud people, and then they've kind of been reduced to this. So, most of them died, and those that are left are the former rulers, and, hey, you know what we're going to go for? Cannibalism and necromancy. Whew! And not just average necromancy. When I mean necromancy, I don't mean the, it's a necromancy spell. I mean the necromancy that a lot of people are like, maybe you shouldn't get into kind of necromancy. So, I also sacrifice a lot of thanks. I hope you enjoyed learning about this area. So, these two nations, well, they're gone. And we have to talk about what caused their destruction, the Eye of Abendego. Because for the last 100 years in Golarion, off the coast of the Sodden Lands, is a big old hurricane. Doesn't move, doesn't go away, but it just dicks with everything nearby. Again, came about after the death of a god in this realm. That's probably the cause of it, but there isn't actually, evidence that exists. It's generally kind of a thought pattern. There was other things that it's done, destroyed two nations. There was colonization of, Gava was kind of halted. So, at the weakest, the hurricane is a pretty strong one. Tearing the sails of biggest ships. At its strongest, the wind will blow even the largest ships to splinters. It spawns smaller storms that travel up and down the coastline of the western Grundy. Torrential rain, hurricane speed winds. A lot of people, especially pirates, both of the Sodden Lands and the Shackles, and a lot of the other areas, have used the Eye to their advantage. It's, hard to chase them and not let them get away when they understand the storm, get around it and stuff. And even the inhabitants of nearby Magoti Island basically use the storm as part of their defenses. The storm has kept any kind of influence from the north from coming down to them, especially with Cheliax so close to them, kept them away. So, there are things in the storm. Ghost ships, aquatic undead, sea monsters, powerful elementals. The kind of things you would think would exist in a gigantic, supernatural, permanent hurricane. Other than that, that's one of those major things here. We had to talk about the Eye of Abendego. It's the, little thing in the room that's kind of like hanging off your back. It's the gremlin in the room that's a giant, honestly, freaking wide is it? Give me a second here to try to generally estimate how wide this storm is from an image that I've been using for my games on Wednesday to figure out here. Let's see here. Sorry. It's about 420 miles. Oh, yeah, no, it's a, at least, almost 420 miles, like a 350 wide storm that just sits there in the middle of this bay. The Shackles to the south, and Montgomery Isle to the west, and the Sodden Lands and their unfortunate, most affected by it ways to the east. The formerly now swamplands of the Sodden Lands. So, is there government in the Sodden Lands? Yes and no. With the major nations being destroyed, there is still things left. Unfortunately, rarely benevolent. Tribal leaders, violent juntas, violence, death, cannibals, necromancy, various other things, It's not a great place when you're talking about it. But there are people and civilization there to a degree. What we have to talk about is who lives here. Because there are people that live here. Hello to our... Oh, I've got both images open. Let's not have both images open. Why did I do that? I thought I turned them off. So there still are people that live here. A lot fled. But there are intelligent creatures in here. Most tend to be or basically more extreme cases of humanoids. Those that probably were in the region to begin with, but weren't necessarily part of the nations that were there. Most of the people that lived there fled. Looters traveled to the area. There are people that still try to make out a living in the area somehow. So you have, if you speak to anybody there, it's usually Common or Polyglot, the two major languages. And the religions there are to Gozera and Norgaber. Gozera because, again, that's a nature deity, and honestly, there's a giant goddamn storm trying to destroy everything constantly there. So, yeah, there are intelligent inhabitants, but there are also a lot of dangerous swamp beasts, because, it's a swampland now. Hydras of various kinds have moved into the area, finding treasures in some of the ruins, and that used to be drowned nations. An infamous muck bunyip called Old Walunga moved into the area. If you go towards the Barrier Mountains north of the Sodden Lands, there's actually protections that a lot of Verdomi soldiers have a series of wards that basically keep any of these horrible swamp monsters from wandering to the north. So, the Boggards were always living in the area. These kind of frog people. I'm not going to dive too deep into Boggards here. We can maybe talk about them in another day. But they were limited to these three small marsh areas. That was it. These were salt marshes that were naturally part of the region. Now that the Sodden Lands is basically all swamp, they've kind of dominated the area. They control most of the northern part of the Sodden Lands. So the area that was formerly Lirgeni is now inhabited very heavily by Boggards. They believe it's connected to Rovagug, the dark god of destruction. And they used to worship Gunta, but within a year of the storm's appearance, they adopted the Rovagug as their deity. So, there are tribes that are ruled by Boggards directly descended from demons. Some are actually ruled by Harazu demons themselves. They have high numbers, but their constant infighting and warring with each other does manage to keep them from becoming major threats to a lot of the other people in the area. They are a major source of power, though, in this area. But we also have, of course, the Grippli. There was the Charaka have risen in power, who are a race of basically ape men, a kind of vulgar term for that that's used to describe them. But they are intelligent simian humanoids. Their rise in the Mwangi Expanse drove a lot of the Grippli out. And so many Grippli tribes have migrated to the Sodden Lands. They've found that it still supports their kind. They're another amphibious race similar to the Boggards, but Grippli tend to be a little bit more to themselves and a lot less violent. So if you're going to talk with any of the frog people, Grippli are the nice ones, honestly. You could do worse with chatting with a Grippli. Now, Grippli aren't the only ones. Let's talk about the humans that still live in the area, because there are two groups, but this is one of them. The Lirgeni. Oh, sorry, I'll do the better picture here. I forgot I can do this. So the Lirgeni are a line of humans that are nearly extinct. That's the easiest way to say that. Though they are from... consider this. It's sort of like, what would happen if, in the olden days, people from Scandinavia all of a sudden were decimated and reduced to a small population? It's the same kind of thing. They are a people of a region who have a unique ethnic group and, appearance that matches the realm, the region that they were from, and that ethnicity was almost driven to extinction. It's a minor human ethnicity at this point in time. The remaining, those that are in the Sodden Lands, are about 5,000 that kind of try to live their way there. They fled from the Eye. There still are some in places you can find them, but they are a people that are mostly lost. There was a major event that did occur in 4717 that can be marked as a major event for the Lirgeni people. They comprise a colony of Lirgeni and their kinfolk, and a bunch of Lizardfolk astrologers, and they arrived at the gates of the xenophobic city of Ja in the Mwangi Expanse, trying to compel the inhabitants to share their secrets. Jaha was deserted, its occupants disappeared, they settled within the abandoned ruins, and Jaha has been open to the outsiders. So this city in the Mwangi Expanse was thought to be just a city that was, there but closed off, and this coalition arrived and found out what happened to everyone that lived there. So now it's no longer in the Sodden Lands, it's deeper into the Mwangi Expanse, but some Lirgeni and a bunch of Lizardfolk, Iruxi, now live there, and it's probably the highest population of their at least the Lirgeni people in all of the Inner Sea region, Avastia or Gurundi. So, will this be a place where they can rebuild some of their old ways? Who knows? The Lirgeni are a people that were honestly destroyed off very heavily. The Eye crushed... countless died. But if you describe Lirgeni by ethnicity, typically tall and thin, broad-shouldered, dark freckled bronze skin with light eyes, braid their dark straight hair. In ways, they were always described, if you're looking at other ethnicities in Golarion, as being kind of similar to Chilaxians, but with like a hint of Tian in them. That was how they were kind of described for their appearance. And they're very similar to the Aslanti kind of bloodline. So they might have been actually more closely related to the Aslantes, which were a major human civilization in thousands of years ago in ancient Golarion. Who can say? But at least some of their brethren survive here. Now, speaking of the Uruxi, the Lizardfolk, we should speak about them a little bit, because they are a major player here too. They are in the southern part of the Sodden Lands. They live in small village, each led by a warrior king, or perhaps a spellcasting shaman that could be an oracle or druid. They actually do have traditions that keep them from fighting each other. So while the Boggards will bicker and fight with each other to the north, battle with each other, the Uruxi will not. There are aggressive kings known as Terwild Lords who build up their strength and, at the expense of more peaceful tribes, launch raids to the northern sections of the Shackles. There have been Lizardfolk that have attacked Shackle settlement of Nermua, which was built on Lizardfolk breeding grounds. But in general, the Lizardfolk tend to be, though xenophobic, much more peaceful than a lot of the other races. So you will find occasionally Uruxi outside of a lot of their territories, but they tend to, more than anything, keep to themselves. Now, there are some other inhabitants that should be mentioned that are a lot more violent and more unpleasant, and this is one of them. Marsh Giants. They have some pretty powerful tribes within the region. They probably were kept down. Not that they weren't in the area, but since this swampland has become that, they've had a lot more power, have larger tribes, and they worship their demon lord Dagon. They found themselves much more hospitable here. Not to speak of other strange, a lot more strange creatures, our good friend the Shambling Mounds. A large group of them are in the Sodden Lands. So, whether or not they formed because it's now swampland and as part of it they came into being as part of the natural energies, or they migrated there because it was more hospitable, hard to say. Now, not to say there aren't other people there, but just as a note here, you do have Scavengers. I should note them before anything. They're groups of Norgabur worshipping looters. Basically, Norgabur is a god of secrets, and because all the secrets were lost with two nations, many secrets remain in these two places. So this disaster attracted these looters as part of the fall of these territories, and not only did they stay around afterwards, they've kind of splintered into basically 24 gangs that are known as the Sodden Scavengers that exist here too. More worshippers of Norgabur occasionally show up too. Now there are two final groups to talk about, and first is these lovely, lovely individuals who are, unfortunately, a group of tieflings. They're tieflings who are descended from daemons, known as Grimspawn. The death decay of the Sodden Lands has attracted them there. Their thin, shallow, pale-eyed skin, that unfortunately these tieflings tend to be mistaken for undead very often, when they're just daemon-blooded. And the idea that the death and decay of the area has actually attracted them too is kind of one of those things. It's unfortunate for them that, whether or not it's... Most of the ones that show up there tend to not be, your tieflings trying to live against your evil outsider heritage and are more living up to it. They're fascinated by sickness, decay in all forms, and, places like here and a lot of other things like the World Wound, perpetual war zones attract them. So, the final group is, of course, as I mentioned before, the remains of the Yamasa, the Kabuto. The feral cannibal tribe of necromancers that once existed in the south. They're nice folks. Always want to generally visit their nice places and have some good times with them. So there you go. There's a good picture of the close enough to the modern Sodden Lands. So you can see here on this image here, which is this one better? That one's a little better and more things. You can see the Sodden Lands, a lot of its major locations. Let's talk about the major natural features here, and then we'll talk about the settlements to finish up today, talking about the Sodden Lands. So, there are some settlements here, or some features here that are important to talk about. The major mountain range is, of course, the Napsupse mountain range. It's the Northwest Garund. It's the blocking range for the separating out, creating the barrier wall, forming the eastern border of the Sodden Lands and the Mwangi Expanse. It's effectively a range that makes sure some of the more settled areas to the north are, in fact, both protected from the storm and what is now in the Sodden Lands. It's interesting that the Sodden Lands basically flooded as far inland as it could, but was mostly blocked by mountain ranges. The large amount of natural mountain ranges in this area have kept the destruction of the Eye of Abendego from being more major than it is. The Shackles, as much as they are affected by it, tend to be a bunch of mountainous islands. That helps them out. They don't get flooded like the Sodden Lands did, which was lowlands. And the jungles also keep that from going, but the mountains protect it. And again, there are people watching that keep, anything from getting out. The Black Flow, or the Black Flow River, is the northernmost of the four major rivers in the Sodden Lands. It rises in the north, flows southwards, then winds westwards into the Arcadian Ocean, close to the edge of the Eye of Abendego. Ogaden stands at the river's mouth. Talk about Ogaden in a minute. The Frogmart Ridge River is another one. It also flows westward into the Arcadian, towards the Arcadian Ocean at the edge of the Eye, and it passed through the flooded ruins of Hiratim, the capital of Lirgeni. We'll talk about that too. The Crab River flows past Kokutang, the capital that was destroyed of Yamasa. And of course, the Terwa River flows north and east past a trading post, Nermua, in Lake Terwa in the Mwangi Expanse. So it basically starts in the Terwa uplands, in the Shackles, and kind of travels into the Sodden Lands. So it is probably the closest one of the major trade rivers that actually would be used of the rivers in this area. Let's talk about these settlements. And this is not these are the four major areas that we will talk about today for four settlements. Look, here's where we can see where Lirgeni and Yamasa were. Circa when a giant storm showed up. We'll talk about a couple locations. But also, as a note, Cheliax has at least one secret coastal bastion in this region, which is based by privateers fighting the region's pirates. So Cheliax is a bunch of privateers that they use to fight them, that they keep in there. So, Greenblood. Yeah. The Free Captains of the Shackles established a area on that just off the coast of the Sodden Lands, located northwest of Nomura. It became known as this Green Blood on a Black Rock, and the settlement grew to become just Green Blood. Brigands, lawless. It's rough even by Shackles standard, and the Shackles is pretty violent and deadly. It's a pirate empire, basically, is the best way to describe the Shackles. So, if you're worse than the pirate empire to your south, you're on the edge of this storm between the Shackles and there, it's a kind of settlement connecting the two. Of course, there are still people surviving in Lirgam's capital, Hiratim. It's a small amount of people that once was there. The Socket Brotherhood had hundreds of towers as an observatory. It drowned the city. The tops of these towers remain above the water. The small population that lives in the cities lives atop of these towers. They've connected them with crude network of rope bridges and pulleys. The one thing that they do have to worry about a lot of is, unfortunately, aberrations from the depth of the Arcadian Ocean that are drawn to these observatories, that make their lives there dangerous. Horrible things from the depths want to come up and be like, what are these that you have here? But, yeah. City sunk. These massive towers, they remained above the water, and people live there still. A little more than 1,000. It's mostly gone. There is a small coastal village in the Sodden Lands. Basically people that defy the eye. Jula. So, Jula, this was once an area that was basically pretty safe. It was on a steep river valley. Its lower districts drowned when the eye came. The mountaintop that was above there, above the flood line, remained. The Knights of Abendego, which are a bandit gang and cult of Norgrimmar, are the people that control Jula. They pillage the town's resources, profiting on what little trade still remains. The forge works around clock to keep them armed. Either you leave and become a refuge, or you're effectively kind of enslaved under the Knights of Abendego. There are leaders in Jula, though, that see to oppose them. Because as much as the Knights basically control the town, there are people there, like an ex-paladin of Erastil, that wishes to just oust them and make the town a much more peaceful place. This was a stopping point between Yamas and the Shackles before the storm came. You know, a lot of things have happened here, but including a giant Elasmosaurus trampling through the bay, the storm itself happening, and Chilaxian invasion that happened there. Oh, and the Knights moving in about, 25 years ago. So, they've had like 25 years of controlling the area, these Knights. And it's still pretty dangerous there, and also the, cannibalistic tribesmen that are probably related to you distantly to the north are, probably a problem. Again, this place sucks. Jula's got problems. You could always have an adventure ousting what's left of there. Kukutang, the capital of Yamasa, it was destroyed, but there's a town on the surface here, where it was. A complex of caves and passages beneath, which are a lot of are flooded. This is the seasonal gathering place of the Kobotu, the cannibalistic descendants of Yamasa. Don't visit there. Don't. You'll be eaten. They'll think you're delicious. So, yeah. People still live there. Not many. It was mostly destroyed. Other known locations to talk about that you might want to know about, just as a few to mention, are Abendo's Piercing. It's a bunch of way stations created by the Knights of Salvation in the Sodden Lands after the appearance of the Eye. They connected to each other by ropes and chains, so it's basically to keep you going between various areas. Knights have left since then, but these shelters they established because they were magically enhanced still survive. Many of them do, and some are monster lairs, some are just there. The one most favorite is Fang Spire. There's also the partially submerged temple of Makum Temple. So these are locations that you can find there. These places that were established as way stations while crossing the Sodden Lands once the storms came. I mentioned Oagun, one of the lost cities in Lirgeni, who is completely covered by floodwater. They launched a magical spaceship from there. So that tells you how advanced they were. Now they're all underwater. There are magical vaults. The 100 Halberd Consortium was a area there. A merchant company that dealt with magic items and exotic creatures that was based out of this area. So you can explore the city with giant diving bells, thick glass, magical kind of based things. Common accidents are common if you're trying to use something like that, but there are also long-tailed aquatic creatures that snatch divers away. So certainly magical vaults filled with magical treasures still exist there, but will you face the dangers of that? And the last place to mention is the waterlogged temple of Xanathar. Where it is in the Sodden Lands is unknown, but it is said to have a legendary treasure hoard there. Basically, one of the last rulers of the Cyclops kingdom of Golgan was supposed to have a treasure hoard in this location, Xanthum. So if you learn about Golgan and explore various places, maybe you too can find the temple and its treasures. And its way through drowned zombies and other horrible things that exist there. But the Hellblood Corsairs are said to have tried to raid it a number of times, but whether they came out with treasures or were just fought off, hard to say. But they were pirate adventurers. So the Hellblood Corsairs. Anyway, that's the Sodden Lands. Yeah. They're a pleasant place to live. Not really, no. It's the unfortunate thing I have to say is the Sodden Lands were a area that once had great potential. As you can see, though its southern nation of Yamasa was certainly behind times, it was still a nation in its own right in the region there. And Lirgeni had powerful magic connections. They built a magic spaceship, basically what would be equivalent to, probably not quite the same ideas, but something like if you're talking Dungeons & Dragons, Spelljammer, and their kind of magical spaceships. Magic spaceships and actual technological spaceships exist in Golarion. Those are another day's topics. But, regardless, making a magical spaceship is ridiculous and cool, And now what's left there? Swampland. A lot of these swamp-based inhabitants that live there have spread out, taken over. The peoples that lived in these two nations have been driven to not near extinction. One of them is attempting to rebuild their lives. The others turn to cannibalism and necromancy, and horrible beasts from the deep and other swamp-based creatures just inhabit the area. And what little cities and settlements you find there are eking their way out in this waterlogged nightmare of a life where you do your best, but everything's trying to kill you, and it's honestly probably pretty terrible. But maybe it's your home. Maybe it's a place to live. Or maybe it's a place for you to go adventuring. Deal with some storms. Find some treasure. Dive under an ocean. Hard to say. There's a lot to be seen at the Sodden Lands, and it's interesting to see that something as devastating and as major as the Eye of Abendego has had major repercussions. Its existence is a thing that cannot be denied, cannot be forgotten, and maybe never will, because will it ever fade? Who knows? An eternal storm may just be eternal. Eridan's death, the Age of Lost Omens, they are marked by many devastations. But this is perhaps the worst of them all. A land to be pitied. A land to be feared. But a land, certainly, of adventure. So, that's it for the Sodden Lands. I hope you enjoyed learning about them. Remember, if you are watching this on YouTube, as I always have, uploaded to it, you can, of course, subscribe there, like, comment, ring the bell, all those things. I'd ask you how to use your Sodden Lands in your Pathfinder ventures. Joining me on Twitch, hi, thanks. Follow would be nice, that'd be a great thing. You can always check out all my links. I have my Discord and Twitter, or whatever it's called now, website formerly known as Twitter, that you can check out for things. just keep in mind for you folks on Twitter, or Twitch, this will be a double episode, so expect some more after we finish up here. But for those of you watching this one on YouTube, I gotta say goodbye for now. Make sure to check out the next time we talk about more Pathfinder and more regions of it and more places. And until that time, I bid all of you out there a good farewell.